Hello, welcome to this video on essential vocabulary for describing line graphs. I'm Surya, and today we will focus on key terms and phrases that will help you describe trends and patterns in line graphs accurately. Let's get started. For those preparing for Academic Writing Task 1, it's important to know that this task tests your ability to interpret visual data such as graphs, charts, and tables, and summarize the key information effectively. Line graphs are one of the most common types of visual data you will encounter in these tasks. Understanding how to analyze and describe them is essential for achieving a high score. Let's first look at what a line graph is. A line graph or chart is a diagram that shows the relationship between two or more sets of numerical data. It's commonly used to display changes over time, identify trends, and illustrate relationships between different data sets. Line graphs can feature one or more lines. For example, you might see a graph with a single line, two lines, or even three or more lines, depending on the complexity of the data being represented. Take a look at these images here to see some examples. A key feature of line graphs is that they help us identify trends over time. For instance, a line may show a steady increase, a sharp decline, fluctuations, or stability as shown on the graphs on the slide. Recognizing these patterns is essential because they form the basis of how we describe line graphs in Writing Task 1. Now, let's focus on an important aspect: vocabulary. We will explore the key vocabulary you need to effectively describe these trends. When describing a line graph, it's important to use suitable introductory verbs to set the context. Common verbs include show, illustrate, compare, indicate, etc. For example, you can say, the graph shows the percentage of male and female students who passed an exam at an educational institution between 2010 and 2017. In this sentence, instead of shows, you can use other introductory verbs such as illustrates, displays, or indicates to add variety to your description. Check the example given on the slide. Remember, when the subject is singular, such as the graph, the verb takes an S ending. So, instead of saying the graph show, you must say the graph shows. These verbs not only help provide clarity, but also help you in paraphrasing the question effectively. Let's shift our focus now to the vocabulary used for describing trends. This vocabulary is essential for clearly and accurately communicating the movements and features of a graph. Take a look at the line graph on this slide. You will notice boxes highlighting key trends such as slight increase, steady, stable, abrupt increase, rapid decrease, fluctuation, etc. These are the types of movements you will need to describe in your response. As we go through the examples and explanations, pay close attention. Mastering this vocabulary will help you write clear and effective descriptions. Now let's take a look at the vocabulary used to describe an upward trend in a line graph. When data increases over time, we can use a variety of verbs and nouns to describe this movement accurately. Here is a list of commonly used words along with example sentences. As you go through them, pay attention to how different words are used to describe similar trends. Pause the video here and read the example sentences to see these words in action. You might have noticed that these words appear in different forms, verbs and nouns. For example, increase can be used as both a verb and a noun, depending on the sentence structure. We will discuss sentence structures in more detail after looking at a model essay in the next video. For now, take a moment to pause the video and review these examples before we move forward. The words on these slides are not an exhaustive list, but provide useful vocabulary for describing trends in line graphs. The examples shown do not cover all the words listed. So to strengthen your learning, practice creating your own sentences with these words. Next, let's explore the vocabulary used to describe a downward trend in a line graph. When data decreases over time, we can use a variety of verbs and nouns to describe this movement accurately. Let's take a look at some commonly used words and example sentences. As you go through them, notice how different words are used to describe similar trends. Pause the video here and read the example sentences to see these words in action. You might have noticed that these words appear in different forms, verbs and nouns. For example, decline can be used as both a verb and a noun, and adjectives can change into adverbs depending on the sentence structure. We will discuss sentence structures in more detail after looking at the model description in the next video. For now, focus on recognizing how different words are used to describe downward movement in a line graph. When describing trends in a line graph, it's important to specify how quickly or significantly the changes occur. To do this, we can use both adverbs and adjectives to describe the type of change. Here are some commonly used words along with example sentences. As you go through them, notice how different words are used to describe large, small, fast, and slow changes. Pause the video here and read the example sentences to understand how these words function in sentences. You might have noticed that these words appear in different forms, adverbs and adjectives. Adverbs like considerably and gradually describe how something changes, while adjectives like considerable and gradual describe the type of change. We will dive deeper into sentence structures later. For now, focus on recognizing how different words are used to describe changes in line graphs. To describe the rate of change, use the words given in the box. For example, considerable, sharp, rapid, gradual, etc. Make sure the rate of change matches the trend you are describing. This means using adjectives and adverbs appropriately based on whether the change is large, small, fast, or slow. When analyzing a line graph, you may notice that the data sometimes reaches its highest or lowest point before changing direction. To describe these points accurately, we use specific words and phrases. Here are some commonly used expressions, along with example sentences. As you go through them, notice how they describe the peak and lowest point in a trend. For describing the highest point, you can use phrases like to peak, to top out, to reach a peak, to reach a maximum. For describing the lowest point, you can use phrases like to hit bottom, to bottom out, and to reach a low point. Pause the video here and read the example sentences to see how these phrases are used in sentences. Not all trends in a line graph show sharp increases or decreases. Sometimes data remains at the same level for a stretch of time without significant changes. To describe these stable trends, we use specific words and phrases, such as remain stable, remain constant, remain steady, stabilize, level off, etc. Some commonly used expressions, along with their example sentences, are provided here. As you go through them, notice how they describe stability in a trend, as shown in the graph. Pause the video here and read the example sentences to see how these words and phrases are used to describe the same information in different ways. You may have noticed that these phrases describe situations where data doesn't change over time. These expressions are particularly useful when summarizing trends that remain stable after a rise or fall. Sometimes, data in a line graph doesn't show a clear upward or downward trend. Instead, it fluctuates, rising and falling unpredictably over time. To describe these changing patterns, we use specific verbs and nouns. Here are some commonly used expressions along with example sentences. As you go through them, pay attention to how they describe fluctuations in a trend. Pause the video here and read the example sentences to understand how these words and phrases are used. You may have noticed that these phrases describe data that doesn't follow a consistent pattern. These expressions are particularly useful when summarizing trends that shift unpredictably rather than moving steadily upward or downward. As we have seen, describing trends accurately requires using the correct prepositions of time. These prepositions specify when changes occurred and enhance the clarity of your description in body paragraphs. On this slide, you will find commonly used prepositions of time along with example sentences. If you look at the sentences, you will notice that different prepositions are used based on the context. At is used to mention specific times or numbers. For example, at 3 p.m., sales stabilized at 200, etc. On is used for specific dates or days, such as on March 10th, on Monday, etc. In is used for months, years, or decades. For example, in March, in 2020, in the last decade, etc. Notice how each preposition is used for different time references. Now, pause here and take a moment to read the remaining examples on the slide. Pay attention to how these prepositions can improve clarity in your writing. Now that we have covered the vocabulary for describing trends, let's focus on an essential IELTS skill, comparing trends between different categories. Instead of simply describing each category separately, we need to highlight how they relate to each other. So let's look at how we can structure our comparisons effectively in writing. First, if you look at the graph on the slide, you will notice a clear contrast between 2010 and 2011. We can describe it as, from 2010 to 2011, while male students' pass rates rose from 10% to 25%, female students' pass rates fell sharply from 60% to just 20%. This is an example of opposing trends in the same period. Next, let's examine the graph from 2012 to 2017. We can observe distinct trends during this period. We can describe it as between 2012 and 2017, male students' pass rates fluctuated significantly, whereas female students' pass rates remained almost stable at around 50%. Additionally, we can note that there was only a slight decrease in 2017. This is a good example of a contrast between a fluctuating trend and a stable trend. Finally, if we look at the overall trend, we can notice that female students achieved higher pass rates compared to male students. This can be written as female students generally had higher pass rates compared to male students throughout the period, except for 1 year where their performance dipped. The highlighted words in these sentences are essential for comparing trends in IELTS Writing Task 1. Words like while, whereas, compared to explicitly show contrasts between two categories. Here it is male and female students. Additionally, generally had higher and except for 1 year provide a clear overall comparison while acknowledging exceptions. These types of comparisons help you effectively analyze and describe data in your IELTS Task 1 response. Now that we have a clear understanding of how to compare trends, let's also focus on connectors and how they help organize our descriptions effectively in Task 1. Some of these connectors were already used in the previous slide when we compared trends. Let's go into more detail on these connectors and see how different connectors serve different purposes in describing line graphs. First, when describing opposite trends, we use connectors like while and whereas, which was seen in the previous slide. They are used to show two trends moving in different directions at the same time. Additionally, phrases such as however, on the other hand, and in contrast highlight differences between trends in different periods or categories. Next, when two trends move in the same direction, we can use words like similarly and likewise to indicate that the trends follow a similar pattern. Additionally, phrases like at the same time and meanwhile help connect trends that occur simultaneously. When summarizing overall trends, we can use expressions like overall, generally, in summary, and in general to highlight key observations and provide a concise overview of the data. In addition to these words, sometimes we need to emphasize certain trends in data. To do this, we can use superlative adjectives such as highest, lowest, largest, and smallest to describe the most significant trends. Similarly, comparative adjectives like higher, lower, larger, and smaller can be used to compare different data points effectively. Using these connectors correctly will improve the clarity and coherence of your IELTS Task 1 response. This concludes our presentation to line graphs and the essential vocabulary needed to describe them. We've explored introductory verbs, various ways to express trends, changes, fluctuations, time prepositions, connectors, all of which will help you improve your ability to write better graph descriptions. In the next video, we will move on to describing a line graph step by step. We will look at a detailed example and analyze how to organize the information effectively. After that, we will focus on using different sentence structures. Thank you for watching. Keep practicing what you have learned, and best of luck with your studies. See you in the next lesson.